Hey guys, today we're gonna be talking about El Chapo. Yeah, we're just gonna talk about him. There's actually a lot to know about him. We're gonna talk about his life a little bit, what happened, and his arrest and his fucking escape. So if y'all want to watch that, keep watching. Joaquin Guzman Loera, aka El Chapo. El Chapo was believed to be born on April 4th, 1957, according to Time magazine, although other sources list his birthday as December 25th, 1954 as his birthday. He got his nickname El Chapo. That basically means like shorty. They're basically just calling him like shorty, but not like shoddy or shorty, like shorty come over here. El Chapo was born in the rural Mexican town of La Tuna, Padre Gato, Sinaloa, Mexico. So that is known to be the birthplace of many notorious drug traffickers. His childhood was shaped by his family's poverty and also by his abusive father. He was a violent man who was in the drug trade also. So not much is known about El Chapo's upbringing, but what I can tell you is just like a couple of things. His father was officially a cattle rancher according to some sources. However, he might have also been a gomero. So a gomero is a opium poppy farmer. He has two younger sisters named Armida Bernarda and four younger brothers named Miguel Angel, Aureliano, and Arturo and Emilio. He did also have three other unnamed older brothers. They did die of natural causes when he was young. El Chapo was raised in a poor farming family. He endured physical abuse from his father. He also entered the drug trade through his father. So what he would do is he would help him grow marijuana for local dealers in their town. The nearest school to him was about 60 miles. So teachers would come, they would travel and they would go out to like rural areas like that and teach the students. They would stay there for a bit and then they would eventually like move on to another area. That's how he went to school. However, he did drop out of school in the 3rd grade. His mother was his emotional support, so him and his mom were like really good. They were tight. There were few opportunities for like jobs in his neighborhood in his town, so he did turn to the cultivation of the opium poppy for like a job, which is like a very common thing for the locals there. So I said that, you know, his father did get him in early in on the drug trade, and so what I mean by that is that his father, they would grow marijuana and they would give it to the two dealers, right? His father sold marijuana at commercial centers near the area, so they would go together and they would go and do that. Although his father did spend most of their like earnings from that on liquor and on women, so he would return home with like no money. And Chapo was like really tired of that, you know, like they have nothing because his dad is spending his money on liquor and on women and returns home with nothing. El Chapo, you know, he was getting tired of his dad's mismanagement with the money like that. So him and a couple of his cousins, they started their own marijuana plantations at the age of 15, and he started supporting his family like that. Once he was a teenager though, El Chapo was kicked out of his home, so he went on to live with his grandfather. He lived there for some time with his grandfather. He left his hometown at the age of 20, and he went on to join organized crime. That's kind of when we first start hearing about El Chapo. Not really us, but like in their own little social group. So that's really all that was kind of said about his upbringing. Now we're gonna talk about how he came to his rise to power. By the late 1970s, El Chapo, he had proven his value in the narcotics business, and so he began working with another rising young dealer named Hector Luis Paloma Salazar. So what he did there is he oversaw the movement of drugs from his home district of Sinaloa on the western end of Mexico, where the narcotics flowed north to coastal cities in the United States. So you'd basically just like make sure they get there. El Chapo, he was, you can say, ambitious in his part of business, like how he did business. He was ambitious in that way because he regularly pressed on his superiors to allow him to increase the share of narcotics that were smuggled across the border. He did favor a violent and serious approach when doing business. So if any of his drug shipments were late, he would simply kill the smuggler. He would kill him himself just by shooting him in the head. So definitely those around him learned that cheating him or going with another competitor, even if it meant this competitor has like lower prices, that it was not good. So the leaders of the Guadalajara cartel liked El Chapo's business, and in the early 1980s, they introduced him to Felix Gallardo. He was one of the major drug lords in Mexico at the time. I kind of go back and forth with my Spanglish and English throughout this, but you'll get it. You'll understand it. Now he starts working with Felix. So he starts off with working with Felix as a chauffeur before he put him in charge of logistics. So now once he was in charge of logistics, El Chapo, he coordinated drug shipments from Colombia to Mexico by land, air, and sea. Throughout most of the 1970s and early 1980s, the Mexican drug traffickers were also middlemen for the Colombian trafficking groups, and they transported cocaine through the U.S.-Mexican border. However, Mexico did remain a secondary route for Colombians. In the mid-1980s, the U.S. government increased their law enforcement surveillance, and they put pressure on the Medellin and Cali cartels by effectively reducing the drug trafficking operations in the Caribbean corridor. So they are now realizing that it's more profitable to hand over the operations to the Mexican counterparts. Colombian cartel gave Felix more control over their drug shipments. So now during the 1980s, the DEA was conducting undercover groundwork in Mexico. So several of their agents worked as informants. So this is where the very first season of Narcos Mexico, which talks about like weed mainly, but it ended up being like so much bigger than weed. Anyway, that is like the beginning of, they talk about Felix Gallardo and they talk about the DEA agent and how it all came out to be. So if you've watched that, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't watched that, I'll tell you that like a long story short. So basically, the DEA agent, Enrique Camarena Salazar, he discovered there was a large marijuana plantation owned by the Guadalajara cartel, and it was known as Rancho Buffalo. So in 1984, the Mexican military, they raided the plantation and like they basically burned that shit to the ground. So Felix Gallardo, once he hears of this happening, he's like, oh, hell no. He was angry, as you can imagine. So he wanted revenge. So him and his men, they kidnapped, tortured, and killed Camarena in February 1985. So obviously, this is a DEA agent that they have just killed. All of Washington was angered, and Mexico was too. What they did is they responded by carrying out a massive manhunt to arrest those involved in the incident. During this time now, El Chapo, so he kept a low profile when his boss was arrested in 1985 for the murder of the DEA agent. He quickly emerges to one of the new faces of the Mexican drug traffickers. During all this chaos, El Chapo, he took advantage of all the crisis going on to gain ground within the cartel and take over more drug trafficking operations. So while Felix was in jail, he organized a summit. So basically just like a big meeting, all the leaders of the cartels to get together to talk about what they're gonna do about what just happened. El Chapo and others, they discussed the future of the Mexico drug trafficking. They agreed to divide the territories that were previously owned by the Guadalajara cartel since their boss was arrested. Thus, through that meeting, formed the Sinaloa cartel under the traffickers Ismael El Mayo Zambada, and then Palma, and then El Chapo. The first time El Chapo was detected by U.S. authorities for his involvement in organized crime was in 1987, where several protected witnesses claimed that he was the head of the Sinaloa cartel. They said that he had coordinated the shipment of 4,400 pounds of marijuana and about 10,400 pounds of cocaine, and that he had received roughly 1.5 million in drug proceeds that were shipped back to his home state. And then there was another indictment that said he earned 100,000 for trafficking 70,000 pounds of cocaine and then an unspecified amount of marijuana in a period of 3 years. El Chapo was a pioneer in the sense that he pioneered the use of tunnels for drug trafficking. We know that because he's used that for other stuff as well. So Palma and El Chapo, they would pack cocaine into chili pepper cans under the brand La Comadre before they were shipped to the US by train. And in return, they were paid through large suitcases filled with millions of dollars in cash. And the suitcases were flown from the US to Mexico City, where corrupt custom agents made sure they were inspected. Moving on, so there was some conflict between the cartels. So this is called the Tijuana cartel conflict, which happened during 1989 and 1993. When Felix was arrested, the Tijuana corridor was handed over to the Arellano Felix brothers and Jesus Labra Avilles and Javier Carro Bayan. So in fears of coup, which basically means like the government taking over or like coming in, Carro Bayan, he fled to Canada. And when he fled to Canada, he was arrested. El Chapo and the rest of the Sinaloa cartel leaders, they were very mad that that happened. So during that time now, there was a lot of back and forth with the leaders trying to kill each other from the other cartels. So because of that, El Chapo, he sent over 40 gunmen to raid the Tijuana cartel. His gunmen ended up injuring many people and then killed 9. So now, since that attack on them, the Tijuana cartel, they literally only cared about revenge. So for months, the members of the Tijuana cartel waited for the perfect moment to make their move. Finally, outside the Guadalajara airport in 1993, that time arrived. A few gunmen took the opportunity when they saw El Chapo sitting in a car. On that day, a member of the Sinaloa cartel was killed, but it was not El Chapo. But 6 people were killed, and ultimately the Cardinal did die. He was killed during the shootout to kill El Chapo. So now the night the Cardinal was killed, Mexican President Carlos Salinas de Gortari, he flew to Guadalajara and he condemned the attack. He stated that it was a criminal activity against a criminal act targeted towards innocent civilians. So the government responded by carrying out a massive manhunt to arrest the people involved in the shootout and offered $5 million in bounties for each of them. So now because of this, pictures of El Chapo's face is going everywhere on newspapers, on television, and he's obviously scared to get captured. So what he did is he fled to Jalisco, to his ranch, or his supposed ranch, and then he fled to Mexico City. And he stayed at a hotel for about 10 days where he met with one of his associates in an unknown location to give him $200 million to take care of his family while he was gone. And then he also gave the same amount, so another $200 million, to another of his employees to make sure the Sinaloa cartel kept running smoothly on their day-to-day activities while he was also gone. So now, after obtaining a passport with the fake name of Jorge Ramos Perez, El Chapo, he was transported to the southern state of Chiapas by one of his trusted associates before leaving the country and settling in Guatemala on June 4th, 1993. His plan was to move across Guatemala with his girlfriend and several of his bodyguards and settle in El Salvador. During his travel, Mexican and Guatemalan authorities were tracking him. So El Chapo, he paid a Guatemalan military official about $1.2 million to allow him to hide south of the Mexican border. That's a lot of money. So I'm assuming the unnamed official, he took it because it just says that he passed on that information to authorities. So he got his cake and he ate it too. So now we're moving on to his first arrest. El Chapo, he was arrested shortly after he fled to Guatemala in 1993. He was later extradited in Mexico, where he was convicted and sentenced to maximum security for 20 years. So now let's talk about that. On the 9th of June, 1993, El Chapo was arrested by the Guatemalan army at a hotel near Tapachula, which is close to the Guatemalan-Mexican border. He was extradited to Mexico 2 days later aboard a military airplane, where he was immediately taken to La Palma, which is a maximum security prison. He was sentenced to 20 years, 9 months in prison on charges of drug trafficking. So he was in there on charges of drug trafficking, criminal association, and bribery. However, his power over his drug cartel didn't end there. Through prison, he delegated orders to keep his operation afloat, and he was even able to receive conjugal visits from his wife and his mistress. Bro. All of this was made possible by hefty bribes to the security guard. So at the time of his arrest, his cartel was the wealthiest and most powerful of Mexico's drug cartels. It smuggled multi-ton cocaine shipments from Colombia through Mexico to the United States by air, sea, and road, and it has distribution cells throughout the US. So associates brought him suitcases of cash to bribe prison workers and to allow him to maintain his lifestyle. So his prison guards were basically acting as his servants because of all his money. So he's in prison. He doesn't like it. He's basically living like regular because he gets everything he wants, even though he's in prison because of his money, but he still wants to escape. So in 2001, El Chapo planned his first epic escape from behind bars. His breakout was probably a lot easier than what most would expect from a maximum security prison. So for El Chapo, money bought his freedom. Obviously, he was able to bribe around 71 security guards. Some of them personally aided him in his prison escape, and he was transported out of the facility in a laundry cart. So let's talk about the date. So on the 19th of January of 2001, Francisco, a prison guard, he opened El Chapo's electronically operated cell door, and El Chapo got into a laundry cart that maintenance worker Javier Gamberos rolled through several doors and eventually out the front door. He was then transported in the trunk of a car driven by Gamberos out of town. So they went to a patrol station, which is like a gas station, right? So Gamberos, he went inside, and then when he came back to the car, El Chapo had gone on foot into the night. So he basically just walked away. So according to officials, 78 people have been implicated in his escape. Gamberos is now in prison for his assistance in the escape. The police say El Chapo carefully masterminded his escape plan, wielding influence over almost everyone in the prison, including the facility's director, who is now in prison for aiding in his escape. one prison guard who came forward to report the situation at the prison, he has disappeared. He disappeared 7 years later and was presumed to have been killed on the orders of El Chapo. El Chapo allegedly had the prison guard on his payroll, smuggled contraband into the prison. He basically received special treatment from the staff. In addition to the prison employee accomplices, police in Jalisco, they were paid off to ensure he had at least 24 hours to get out of the state and stay ahead of the military manhunt. So the story that was told for the guards not to check the laundry cart on their way out was that El Chapo was smuggling gold that was extracted from rocks at the inmate workshop out of the prison. So the escape allegedly cost El Chapo $2.5 million. So after El Chapo's first prison escape, his drug operations seemed to flourish. So the Sinaloa cartel was still successfully exporting illegal drugs into the US, but also many other surrounding countries as well. So it was suspected that El Chapo's drug business was taking in a yearly amount of $3 billion. So this kind of annual cash flow made him a billionaire. So in 2009, El Chapo was ranked number 701 on the Forbes list of the world's richest people. So now he has escaped his first arrest and he's on the run this whole time, hiding out, not trying to get caught. So it's gonna lead us into his second arrest. So now, a week before El Chapo was caught, him and Zambada were reported to have attended a family reunion in Sinaloa. So on the 16th of February of 2014, the Mexican military followed the bodyguard's tips to El Chapo's former wife's house. They had trouble ramming into the steel-enforced front door, which allowed El Chapo to escape through a system of secret tunnels that connected 6 houses, eventually moving south to Mazatlan. So he had planned to stay a few days in Mazatlan to see his twin baby daughters before retreating back into the mountains, which is like where he's hiding out. So after months of planning and preparation, American Marines caught a lucky break when they captured El Chapo on February 22nd, 2014. So he was arrested in a condo near the beach in Mazatlan, Mexico. U.S. officials used the element of surprise, infrared, and body heat scanners to successfully locate and detain El Chapo. So he was sleeping next to his wife when the Marines barged in. Luckily, though, no one was hurt in this operation, despite El Chapo having an AK-47 right beside of him, next to him in bed. So now, back again, let's talk about it again, like the date and how it happened. So on February 22nd, 2014, at around 6:40 a.m., Mexican authorities arrested El Chapo at a hotel in the beachfront area in Mazatlan. So following an operation by the Mexican Navy with joint intelligence from the DEA and the U.S. Marshal Service. So a few days before his capture, Mexican authorities had been raiding several properties owned by the members of the Sinaloa cartel. The operation leading to his capture began at 3:45 a.m. 10 pickup trucks of the Mexican Navy carrying over 65 Marines made their way into the resort area. So El Chapo was hiding at the Miramar condominium. So Mexican and U.S. federal agents had leads that El Chapo had been at the location for at least 2 days and that he was staying on the condominium's 4th floor in room 401 to be exact. So when the Mexican authorities arrived at the location, they quickly subdued one of El Chapo's bodyguard before quietly making their way to the 4th floor by the elevators and the stairs. Once they were at El Chapo's front door, they broke into the apartment and stormed into its 2 rooms. In one of the rooms was El Chapo lying in bed with his wife, and their 2 daughters were reported to have been at the condominium during the arrest. El Chapo tried to resist arrest physically, but he did not attempt to grab a rifle he had close to him, which was his AK-47. And during that time that he was trying to resist, he was hit 4 times. Now, by 6:40 a.m., he was arrested and taken to the ground floor and walked to the condominium's parking lot, where the first photos of his capture were taken. So now he was flown to Mexico City for formal identification. And according to the Mexican government, no shots were fired during this operation. That's a good thing. Yay. So now, El Chapo, he was imprisoned at r.owsio Readaptation Center number 1 on the same day of his capture on the 22nd of February of 2014. The area where he lived was highly restricted. So he went to prison the same day he was captured. They're like, gots to go. So the area that he lived in was highly restricted. The cells are without windows, so the inmates aren't allowed to interact with each other, and they are not permitted to contact their family members. His cell was close to one of those other cartel leaders. El Chapo was alone in his cell, and he had 1 bed and 1 shower and a single toilet. His lawyer, he did make it possible for him to receive visits from members of his family every 9 days from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. This foundation is really nice, huh? If approved by a judge. And he was granted by law the right to receive a maximum of $48 every month to buy products for personal hygiene. So in Mexico it's like 638 pesos, but like in US it's like $48. So that was for his personal hygiene. So now they're like, no, you're not gonna be living lavishly like you did last time you were imprisoned. This is the real deal. He lived under 23 hours of solitary confinement with about 1 hour of outdoor exposure. He was only allowed to speak with people during his judicial hearings. The prison guards were not allowed to talk to him. And unlike the other inmates, El Chapo was prohibited from practicing sport or cultural activities. So these conditions were court approved and could only be changed by a federal judge if he decided to amend them. So obviously his time in that prison is not good. He is definitely not with the shits. So what do you think he does? Yes, he decides to escape again. So now let's move on to his second escape. So as soon as El Chapo entered the prison, he began planning his next escape. It would take him almost a year to finalize his breakout plan, and in 2015 he escaped a maximum security prison once again, this time by crawling through a tight opening in the shower area of his cell. And once El Chapo squeezed through the hole, he traveled through a well-lit, ventilated tunnel to a small house in a rural farm near the prison. So let's talk about the day. On the 11th of July of 2015, oh my god, that's like around the time that I graduated high school. So I remember that because I remember being like, oh my god, everybody was freaking out. They were like, he escaped through a tunnel, blah blah blah, and we're like, ah, that's so crazy. Anyways, let's move on. El Chapo escaped from the prison. He was last seen by the security cameras at 20:52 hours, which is like 8:52 p.m. It was near the shower area in his cell. So the shower was the only part of his cell that was not visible through the security camera. And after the guards did not see him for 25 minutes on surveillance video, personnel went looking for him. So now that they went looking for him, when they reached his cell, El Chapo was gone. So it was discovered that he had escaped through a tunnel leading from the shower area to a house construction site that was about almost a mile away in Santa Juanita, in that neighborhood. So the tunnel was about 33 feet deep underground, and El Chapo used a ladder to climb to the bottom. And the tunnel was about 5 feet 7 inches tall and 30 inches in width. It was equipped with artificial light and air ducts and high quality construction materials. In addition, a motorcycle was found in the tunnel, which authorities think was used to transport materials and possibly El Chapo himself. So the escape obviously triggered triggered a manhunt. The manhunt was instituted immediately in the surrounding area by putting up several checkpoints and air searches by helicopters. So after this escape, obviously El Chapo is on the run, so he's hiding out and all that again. And during this time, he ends up meeting Kate del Castillo and Sean Penn, which is also on Netflix if y'all want to watch it. It's called The Day I Met El Chapo, and I think it's from like Kate del Castillo's point of view, kind of just explaining what happened and all that. She did get a lot of backlash, I'm pretty sure. And then I'm pretty sure Sean Penn like basically manipulated her into getting him a interview with El Chapo, if I'm not mistaken, right? So while on the run, El Chapo agreed to an interview with actor slash activist turned journalist Sean Penn. Their secret meeting was at an undisclosed location. It caused an uproar in the journalistic community. The Rolling Stone magazine article was highly criticized, and one major intrusion on media ethics was when Penn allowed El Chapo to read and approve the piece before publication. Pretty sure he did that because he was like, well, I don't want to die. I feel like this too would really kill me. I'm like, nah, I don't know though. So the act violated one of the commonly held rules of journalistic integrity. On the 2nd of October, Kate and Sean Penn visited El Chapo for 7 hours at his hideout in the mountains, with Penn interviewing him for the Rolling Stone magazine. So El Chapo, he had never before acknowledged his drug trafficking to a journalist, but he did go on and tell Sean Penn that he had a fleet of narco submarines and airplanes and trucks and boats. And then he also said that he supplied more heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana than anybody else in the world. So because of this meeting, a lot of people do say that that is what made El Chapo get caught again. So we're gonna move on to his third arrest now. After a year on the run, El Chapo was captured on January 8th, 2016. He was arrested by Mexican authorities in Sinaloa, and unfortunately his capture this time, it wasn't as peaceful as the last one. So a shootout occurred between the drug cartel and the Mexican authorities, ultimately leading to 5 deaths. After a year in Mexican prisons, El Chapo was handed over to the U.S. authorities in 2017. This is not blending out the way I wanted it to blend out, and I don't know why. I don't know what to do. How did he get arrested the third time? So citizens reported that armed people were in a house at the coastal city of Los Mochis in northern Sinaloa, which was then placed under surveillance for a month. So they monitored communications that indicated that the home was being prepared for the arrival of grandma or aunt, which authorities suspected was code for a high priority potential target. After the gunmen returned to the house, they placed a large order of tacos at a nearby restaurant, and they went to pick up the order in a white van after midnight. So the residence was raided in the early hours of January 8, 2016 in Operation Black Swan by 17 Marines from the Mexican Navy Special Forces, with support from the Mexican Army and the federal police. But El Chapo and a lieutenant escaped through a secret tunnel. Tunnels are everywhere in the story, and stealing a vehicle at gunpoint. So a statewide alert was issued for the stolen vehicle, and the federal police located and intercepted it about 20 kilometers south of Los Mochis. El Chapo attempted to bribe the officers with offers of cash or properties and offers of job. When the officers refused, El Chapo told them, "You are all gonna die." The 4 police officers sent pictures of El Chapo to their superiors, who were tipped that 40 assassins were on their way to free El Chapo. To avoid the counterattack by cartel members, the policemen were told to take the prisoners to a motel on the outskirts of town to wait for reinforcements and later hand over the prisoners to the Marines. So they were taken to Los Mochis airport for transport to Mexico City, where El Chapo was presented at the Mexico City airport and then flown by a Navy helicopter to the same maximum security prison which he escaped in July of 2015. So during the raid, 5 gunmen were killed, 6 others were arrested, and 1 Marine was wounded. So the Mexican Navy said that they found 2 armored cars, 8 assault rifles, including 2 Barrett M82 sniper rifles, 2 M16 rifles with grenade launchers, and a loaded rocket-propelled grenade launcher. On the 19th of January of 2017, El Chapo was extradited to the U.S. to face the charges and turn over to the custody of HSI and DEA agents. So he was housed at the maximum security wing of the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York, located in Manhattan. He pled not guilty on the 20th of January to a 17-count indictment in the United States District Court in New York. So the U.S. District Judge scheduled his trial for the 5th of November of 2018 when the jury selection began. So according to the prosecutors, juror anonymity and an armed escort are necessary even if El Chapo is isolated due to his history of having jurors and witnesses murdered. So the judge agreed to keep the jurors anonymous and to have El Chapo transported to and from the courthouse by U.S. Marshals and sequestered from the public while in the courthouse. So opening arguments began Tuesday, November 13th, and closing arguments took place on the 31st of January, 2019. So El Chapo was found guilty of all counts on February the 12th, 2019. He was sentenced on the 17th of July of 2019 to life in prison plus 30 years and ordered to forfeit more than $12.6 billion. So he is now serving his sentence at ADX Florence, the nation's most secure supermax prison. So still in prison, but let's talk about like a little facts here and there. So El Chapo's immense success was driven by 2 factors: his creative smuggling and his fear. So he inflicted fear on people. Obviously, people were really scared to fuck him over or to go to other competitors, like we had said earlier, and smuggling. So he created, like I said, he was a pioneer, created tunnels, and that's how he became really successful with those 2 things. So around 1989, the Sinaloa cartel, they began to build a network of cross-border tunnels that reached as far as 5,000 feet long. Within these tunnels, substantial amounts of illegal drugs were being transported into the United States. So another method that he did use was stashing cocaine powder into fire extinguishers, and then also the chili pepper labeled cans. Despite being in prison, El Chapo, he made secure that his wife and his 2 daughters continued to live a life of luxury. You can often see her flaunting her wealth on Instagram, on social media. But also what happened later on in the year of 2019, I don't know if y'all remember, it was like October 17, 2019. Mexican security forces, they temporarily detained Guzman Lopez, which is El Chapo's son. So during a shootout with suspected cartel members in the Sinaloa state. So later on, he was released and the operation was finished. It was suspended in order to save lives. I don't know if y'all remember that happening. There was like a time period where everybody was like, oh my gosh, El Chapo's son is so cute. Oh my god, I want to be a narco wife. You know, y'all remember that? Where everybody's like, oh. But on Twitter, there was a lot of videos of the shootout happening and like regular people filming themselves and being like, oh my god, these people are like driving down the street, shooting at everything, and you basically just gotta hide out. And they were doing that so that El Chapo's son would be released. And then the authorities were like, well, they did it to save lives, but basically everybody was like, yeah, the cartel. And there's a lot of mixed emotions in that, you know, but at least they did it to save lives. And it was very interesting because we were like, in that moment when they were posting those, we were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then they found out that it was El Chapo's son that was detained, and that the cartel was doing that because El Chapo's son was detained. And so they're like, give him up, let him come back out, like leave him alone and we'll go away. And they were like, nah. So like they kept doing that, and then they were like, okay, we'll do it because to save lives. So I mean, that's just like kind of tells you the impact that El Chapo has, the impact that his cartel has on a lot of shit that's going on in Mexico, a lot of fucked up shit. And yeah, just a little insight of El Chapo.